few years back, I'm not really sure what year it was, but I went on my first trip to South Africa. And I went with my friend Iiro, and we were invited there by another friend named John. And John was a South African who lived in Cape Town. He invited us to come down on a base jumping trip through Africa, and we actually ended up doing 30 jumps off 12 different objects in 10 days. After we were done with that jumping, I was going to stay for another month, just jumping around some more, while Iiro went home. And Iiro left. John took me up to a place called Durban, which is a little bit north of Cape Town. And in Durban, they had this thing right next to it in Pietermaritzburg called Howick Falls, which was a 300-foot waterfall. So we drive over to Howick Falls, and we're with his friend. His name was Rat, and he was like he was a new jumper. He only had like 4 base jumps. So we get there, we look at it, and the wind conditions really aren't that bad there. It's kind of protected from the wind, and it looked like it was okay. I decided, well, we'll just put our gear on, we'll walk over, drop a few wind indicators, and if they look good, then we'll go for it. The waterfall was pumping pretty hard. There was a lot of water coming off of it, massive amount of water volume. And I looked down, I'm like, well, that's a lot of water, but it's not too bad. I look over the edge, and I pretty much figure, well, I'm over water, so I can get a 180, and I'll be able to just sink it back and drop right in the water. 90 right, no problem. On heading, no problem. The only thing that would be a problem is if my canopy opened with a 90 degree to the left, meaning my parachute opens facing the waterfall. And I knew if that happened, then I'd be in pretty big trouble because I'd most likely hit the waterfall because I was very, very close to it. And I thought about it a little bit. I'm like, well, if I do hit the waterfall, I'm over water, so I'm probably not going to die. So I look over the edge and I say goodbye to Rat and I jump off. And sure enough, when I jump off, I actually drop a left shoulder. And as I drop my left shoulder, it throws off the symmetry of my body, which creates an asymmetrical opening of my canopy, meaning my parachute then opens facing to the left. So, I mean, I'm looking at it going, ugh, I grab a rear riser, I'm turning away from the waterfall, I actually turn away and I'm looking away from it, and I think, oh, I've made it, I've gotten away. And right as I think that, I feel the water grab me and just suck me in. As the waterfall sucks me in, it collapses my canopy and I actually drop back behind the waterfall. And I actually look down and can see the cliff behind the waterfall like coming up at me really, really quickly. I kind of hit the cliff in a sitting position, and as I hit, I could actually feel my back just crack and break. Then I fell forward and I impacted again, which then crushed my ribs. And then I fell, I don't know how many feet head first into the water underneath. First thing I remember is like being held under and I felt like I was being pushed down very, very deep. And then I remember thinking, I need air. Air is very important. And I'm like, well, can I move my feet? Am I paralyzed? And I start wiggling my toes and I'm like, okay, I'm not paralyzed. So I'll be able to base jump again, which was like very important to me. It was, okay, I'm not paralyzed, so I'm gonna be able to continue jumping. Then I remember kind of like just feeling an enormous amount of pain. And I remember thinking, okay, I need air. I need to get to the surface. I need air. All of a sudden, I come up to the surface and I go to take a breath, and my breathing was very difficult for me because my ribs were kind of like pushing against my lungs, and it was making it very hard for me to breathe. But I was taking like really shallow breaths, and I was able to just wiggle my arms just enough to keep my head above water. I then floated downstream to these like rocks, and I remember just kind of like laying there just feeling enormous amounts of pain, finding it very difficult to breathe. I then roll over and put my arms around a big rock and just kind of lay there. Now I'm kind of like just shaking and getting very, very cold because it's Africa, which is a warm place, but I'm in water, and then there's like this blast of air like coming off of the waterfall, this like water and blast just that's making it very, very cold for me. Then I remember feeling like these little animals like starting to crawl on me, and I realized that they were little crabs that were living in the water. and they decided that they, basically as I hit the cliff the first time, I had torn my backside open. So I have a huge gash from like where the cliff hit me, and it tore my pants and ripped me open in the back. And the little crabs were heading for the wound on my back to start eating it. And it was actually quite an unpleasant feeling to have animals biting away at your flesh. So I mean, they'd start biting me and I'd put a hand back. I could move, but very, very slowly. So I would be able to reach back and brush them off a little bit, and then they'd come, and they just kept attacking me for about an hour until my friends got to me. John got to me and started pulling me out of the water, but I was just way too heavy for him. He couldn't lift me. So he's only able to get me a few feet away from the water. Gets me out of the water, he can see that I'm really, really cold, so he wraps me in my canopy. Then, while I'm underneath this canopy and he's like sitting next to me, it takes 2 more hours for the rescue crew to come and get to me. When you're in that situation, you become very goal-orientated. Like the first thought was I needed air. The next thought was I just need to get out of the water and get away from the crabs. I need something warm wrapped around me. Then once I got the canopy wrapped around me and I was warm, then the thought was, man, I need to just get on a backboard. All I want to do is be on a backboard so they can, because I'm like laying on rocks and they're jabbing into me and all of my body's hurting, my back's hurting, my ribs are hurting, everything's hurting. So pretty much my goal at that point was to get on a backboard. Once the rescue crew got to me and put me on a backboard, then the idea was, man, I just want to get into an ambulance. I just want to get in the ambulance into a nice comfortable bed. And it actually took the rescue crew about 6 hours to carry me out from inside this, like, you know, Howard Falls gorge that was at the bottom. It took them about 6 hours to carry me out. So from impacting to being in an ambulance was about 9 hours. When they finally did the MRI, magnetic x-rays on my back, they found out that I had broken my sacrum, I'd broken my L1 vertebrae, and I'd broken my tailbone and shifted it 45 degrees in. I'd also crushed my ribs in the front, separating all of them. I also broke a rib in the back. I also broke my left foot, and I had torn stuff in my right knee. I ended up laying on my back in the hospital in South Africa for 1 month. Before I was finally airvac'd back to the United States.
So Jeb, base jumping is fun, eh?
Oh yeah. Ouch.
One of the funny things was the doctor came in right after, it was right after it happened, and I was still in the emergency room, and he looks at me and he's like, well, so you're not gonna be jumping off any more buildings or cliffs or waterfalls anymore, are you? And I kind of look at him and I say, well, there's only 2 things in this world that will prevent me from base jumping. And he's all, really, what's that? I'm all, quadriplegia or death. And he looks at me and he's like, wow, okay. It's like, well, I guess you like what you do. And I'm like, yes, it's very important to me.